Faith Matters. An interactive program brought to you by MTA International.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Faith Matters, a program in which we discuss a number of contemporary issues from a religious and Islamic viewpoint. As you are aware that this is an interactive program, and so the discussion that we have here in the studio is based upon the questions that you send us. And you can send your questions to us at faithmatters@mta.tv, that's faithmatters@mta.tv, and any comment or observation that you may have. Also, you can access the previous programs and view them and any particular subject of your interest on our Faith Matters YouTube channel. With that very brief introduction, I would like to welcome our esteemed panel of scholars joining us for today's program. We have to my immediate right Maulana Azhar Hanif Sahib, who is the missionary of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and is serving as the Vice President of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat in USA. Sitting alongside him, we have Dr. Zahid Sahib, who is the President of the Qaza board here in the UK, and both are very familiar faces on Faith Matters. Gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to today's program. We're going to start off the discussion today with a question from the USA. Mahmood Saab asks a question, and Mahmood Saab, Jazakallah for your question and your ever so kind comments. There's a lot to unravel from this particular question. I'll just read out exactly what he says. He says that if you do what you are convinced is wrong, though it is in truth not wrong, are you doing wrong? Or he says that if you decide not to do something which you believe is no obligation for you to do, though in fact is what you ought to do, are you acting wrongly? So I think he's, perhaps in simpler terms, he's asking about something about, the false conscious. So Azhar Nisab, if you could elaborate on this.
Well, one thing, this is a very interesting question to deal with, because it's looking beyond what is clearly guidance in faith, guidance from the Quran, guidance from the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's going down to the individual. How individually we somehow process these instructions and directions we get from Almighty Allah through Quran, through the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And therein, sometimes individuals may have the struggle of not clearly knowing how to differentiate right from wrong, and as a result, begin to believe what is actually right is wrong, and what is wrong is actually right. First off, though, we must be very clear. Holy Quran has laid out a principle that man has been embedded with conscience and does know right and wrong. So this is a healthy person. This is a person in touch with the innate conscience that is given to them. Quran says in Surah Al-Balad, chapter 90 of Quran, verse number 11, وَحَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, and we have guided him to the two highways of good and evil. So every human being, whether or not they have a belief system in Islam or any faith system, or even has no faith system, it's embedded in our conscience to know right and wrong. Now, this also is a hadith of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says that anything that pricks your conscience, you should avoid it, because it talks about that innate quality of a human being to know this is right and this is wrong. And again, you don't have to have any guidance for that, any scripture to look at. People tend to know. If you see murder, the first time you see an act of murder, God forbid if you are involved in it, it strikes you, it shakes you. Everyone understands this is the first reaction to that, so you know this is wrong. If you see some filth or pollution on the area you're sitting or moving, you avoid it, because you know this is filthy and I should avoid these things. It's embedded in us to avoid filth, to avoid wrongdoings. But sometimes a person may get confused in life, and this is the issue he's raising here, as to what are the real innate things that are right and wrong. And so if this is the case, God still is judging the person based on all circumstances, because this obviously is not a person who is confused, let's say, is not clear as to these pathways any longer. So now who's to judge? I'm not to judge what's in your conscience, because as like you say right now, you can be sitting here looking across the room and seeing pink elephants. I can't say you're not seeing it. You're seeing it. But why are you seeing that? What's happened to you that you see something I don't see?
But I can assure you that
I'm quite confident that right now you're seeing Dr. Zahid Ahmad. But in the case of some people, as he's saying, that suppose they think that stealing some money, as the Robin Hood principle, is a good thing because I'm going to give it to the poor to help them out. And so it begins to take this money, convincing themselves that I'm doing a good deed. And the law will say you're committing a crime. So now this is not an issue of what is right and wrong. It's an issue of how the person is understanding their actions. Allah is understanding the overall judgment, but how a person is understanding. And for that, really one has to always be into prayer, always seeking God's guidance, that you remain on those pathways of right and wrong and not be influenced by what could be satanic influences, in a sense, or what could be societal influences, or what could be personal weaknesses and intellect and understanding that lead you to this kind of confusion. But in terms of Islam, it's quite clear. Conscience is embedded, the correct pathways of right and wrong are there, and we should always strive to follow those pathways of what Islam has advocated to do and what not to do. And then one is in a balanced state. So I think this whole thing is referring to individuals and not to the overall Islamic principles, which are quite clear.
Jazakallah. I hope that answers Mahmood Saab's question. Dr. Saab, if I can just bring you in with reference to what Azhar Hanif Saab just said, that this is an innate faculty within anyone to know to distinguish between right and wrong. But surely it comes at a variance, it varies between person to person. So what does Islam say about that in terms of, Allah doesn't burden a soul beyond their capacity?
As far as human beings are concerned, God says regarding us, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We are His most beautiful and most perfect creation, and as we have been given intellect. And as Sahib has said, that is what we use in trying to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. But on the same time, we have a very merciful God. This is what Islam really teaches us, and this is the beauty of Islam, that the idea that we have of Allah is that of mercy encompassing everything else. And He says, as far as individuals are concerned, that He will not burden any soul beyond its capacity. So everybody has different capabilities and capacities, and that is how we will be judged according to our capabilities and capacities of how we understood certain situations. So that is important. But together with that, Allah says that it shall have the reward that it earns. Everyone will have the reward that it earns, and it will have the punishment that it incurs. So this is the accountability nature of things as well. It is interesting that in Surah Baqarah, where this is mentioned, the words that are used are of significance here, and it relates to the fact that if we do a good deed, even if it is done casually, then without actually putting full thought into it, Allah will reward us for having done that good deed. But as far as your punishment is concerned, you have to do that deliberately. Misdeed that you must have done deliberately, knowing full well that this was something which was a bad deed you should not have done. And Allah will then punish you for that. So it just shows you the balance that Allah has over these things, that He is a merciful God, and that He will reward us in respect of that, and mercy being encompassed. There is an incident, isn't there, of the angels coming to earth and going back to report to Allah, and Allah says, what were my servants doing on earth? And they said, oh, merciful Allah, they were gathered together and they were busy in the remembrance of Allah. And He said, fine, they will all be blessed for this, and they will be rewarded for that. And the angel said, but there was one person who was a wayfarer, and he had stumbled upon these people, and he was not part of the group, but he had just gone there to see what was happening. And Allah said, I will also reward him too, although he had not gone with that intention in mind. But just because he was there and in present there, he was rewarded as such. So this shows the merciful nature of God Almighty.
Exactly, a very detailed answer. The next question is from Yasir Rizwan Sahib. Yasir, Jazakallah for your question. His question is in reference to a particular article that he read, where Norway is considering proposing a law with regards to if anyone feeds a homeless or aids a homeless, he could be subjected to 6 months to a year imprisonment. Dr. Saab, if I could ask you, what's the Islamic perspective on the idea of begging, and what's the alternative that Islam proposes?
Well, you see, if we look at Islam as such, the Holy Quran as such, and we find as to what the responsibilities of man are towards his fellow man, then we have this overall idea that Islam is teaching us the welfare of each and every section of our society that we live in. And there are people who are in a worse situation than others, maybe economically, morally, or whatever. And Islam teaches us to be compassionate to these people and to be always merciful to them. This is the nature that we are taught as far as economic hardships are concerned. So during the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, we are aware of this situation, that there were people who were destitute, and how their status was actually raised by the Holy Prophet ﷺ, although at the same time reminding them that begging was not the way to go. So he discouraged begging in every respect, but at the same time he also laid the emphasis of helping those people who were needy upon Muslims, that this was part and parcel of their duty as such. The Holy Quran in a number of places talks about the importance of looking after the needy and the poor. And the whole ethos of that help is very much different in Islam. Allah the Almighty says that the poor have a share in the wealth of the rich. So that is the one thing that society needs always to comprehend, is that you're not doing the poor a favor by giving to them, but this is their right. So it is an obligation on a person who has the means to help them in that sense, and not to think that he is doing them a favor, but to realize that he is returning a right which really was theirs, and that he is returning that to them in essence. That encapsulates the whole concept of Islamic society as such, that of course the society has a responsibility. The welfare state that we saw in Islam has a responsibility for people. But sometimes people do find themselves in a situation where they are not able to cater for their needs, and they resort to begging. However, the Prophet of Allah on the pulpit, Hazrat Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu relates that the Prophet of Allah was talking to us about zakat and about the needy, but he said that the upper hand is better than the lower hand, meaning the hand that gives is better than the hand that takes. So that is a discouragement, certainly, of begging in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ also on another occasion, he said, it is better for you to get a rope, to go and get some wood, cut down some wood, put the bundle on his back and go and sell that, rather than turn to begging in the streets. So that again encapsulates the thing that you must do whatever is in your power to try to earn your livelihood. And that is the important thing in today's society as well, that people have opportunities to find employment. Maybe this may be below their levels, but that is not what matters. They have to go out and find the employment to earn the crust, so that they are not relying on handouts from people. And that is the ethos of Islam. The Prophet of Allah has reiterated that and emphasized on this point as far as begging is concerned. So this is the situation in Islam, and this is what Islam says has a balance between everything in that nature. But we must also say that man must do what he can in order to earn his livelihood, rather than turning to begging in the streets.
Dr. Saab, you mentioned something interesting, is that if Islam does prohibit something or discourage something, it then gives you the most perfect solution to it as well. As you mentioned, the greatest Islamic, the system that proposes of charity. That's something that I think, Hanif Saab, if you can just touch upon that, the spirit that it instills between its believers of giving and doing good charitable works.
Yes. Well, echoing what Dr. Saab has said, the first thing that strikes you about this whole law is it is going to limit those who want to do charitable service to society. And this is the uproar in Norway and other countries, that how can you distinguish between those who are truly in need and those who are part of these organized, groups and gangs or whatever, a sense of a mafia out here just using the sentiments of humankind, playing on their desire to be sympathetic, to be charitable, and taking the money. And I think if anyone who's traveled to certain countries, you've seen them all over the place. They'll just completely disregard the conditions of people and put in front of them, the lame, the weak, the children, and have them go around begging. And then you walk around the corner and you see these children taking the money and dropping them in boxes or whatever and giving to other people, and they're driving off in these expensive cars and these things. So this is what the government's talking about, how to stop that. Now that may be legitimate, but as you say, if it goes beyond a certain point, it will effectively prevent those who want to be charitable, and this is Islamic system, to use charity. We have the sadaqah system, which is the open charity, which should always begin amongst those who are your near relatives and friends and relations and neighbors, to help them in times of need. And then you have the whole system of zakat. Zakat is a system created in the Islamic system of economics to make sure money flows to society. And if these two things are adopted, probably you won't have beggars in the street. And organized crime couldn't even take advantage because no one would be around begging. So how would you get beggars to go out there to be your organized hitmen, so to speak, to grab money from people, when there's no need to beg in such a society that Islam is creating? And by God's grace, that was the welfare state established by Hazrat Umar Talanho, primarily, almost like Prophet Solomon amongst the Jews. It was a phenomenal system of distributing wealth amongst the needy on every level, so you wouldn't see beggars in the street. Our societies nowadays don't have these elements. So even with welfare states, you see people still homeless, people still can't get jobs, people still can't get proper education, or as Dr. Saab said, find a career or a skill that can give you enough money to take care of your needs. So the result is they're still out there in the streets begging in some form or fashion. And these are dignified people who may have lost their job, who may not have the capacity to make ends meet, and so they are part and parcel of the struggle of society. And Islam wants to remove these struggles by making it a very harmonious society that's sympathetic, that's providing for every person so that they don't have to become beggars. And if that's the case, if society hasn't done that, then you can't blame the beggars. You have to look at the problem in society. This, I think, is the difference.
Jazakallah, gentlemen. In fact, I think one other key thing here is that probably Dr. Saab you mentioned as well, was to raise the status of those people as well. And I think education plays a huge part and role in that. And our next question actually is about that. Abid Salim Saib from Germany, he asked that, and as Hanif Saab, I ask you this question, that what exactly is the Islamic system of education?
This is nowadays, I think, is a very interesting question, because you have a group that says education is haram. This is Boko. This education of the Western system is haram, is forbidden. And they're going around in a campaign in Nigeria advocating not to become educated based on this system, as if it is un-Islamic. Whereas there is no Islam or un-Islam in ilm, knowledge. Knowledge is of this world, or knowledge is of God. These are the two things we want to learn in life. We have a prayer in Quran, Rabbi zidni ilma, oh Allah, increase me in knowledge. Which knowledge? Knowledge of God's attributes. This is the first knowledge He gave to Prophet Adam. Knowledge of his own being, of how his being manifests itself all around in life. And once you have that knowledge, you have the key to unlock so many of the so-called mysteries and things that can be confusing for your life. So you have the ability to progress and prosper, knowing God's attributes. Second is knowledge of this world. So there's nothing haram in learning science, learning chemistry, biology. I don't know how they can say that this is, also not knowing that it were the Muslims, the early Muslims, who introduced this knowledge to the world. And it's the Western nations who took the knowledge and developed in certain, but it was Muslims who laid the foundations of so much knowledge that is now so-called Western knowledge. So in effect, they're cutting the branch of the tree which they're sitting on. by saying don't get educated. And the Holy Prophet Muhammad said that talib al-ilm, seeking knowledge, farida, is a duty ala kulli muslim and muslima, on every Muslim man and woman. This was the basic impetus he gave for education. And perhaps again we don't realize it, the first university ever in the world, modern world, was established by a Muslim woman. On what basis? The same system we have now. She broke it down to compartmentalize, that you specialize in certain fields of knowledge, and once you have mastered it, you get a degree. Lo and behold, what do we have now? All universities and colleges give you degrees once you master it. This came from Islam. And this was a system which the Holy Prophet Muhammad, he had advocated, because in the end, he was illiterate. He was uneducated. He didn't have basic education. And he respected, he realized, as you said, this is the way to improve society. And those societies that are not educated and not literally in standard, they remain undeveloped and uncivil. And also the moral and spiritual standard also comes down. So he advocated for overall society in all areas, whether it's begging or crime or the improvement of life in any area, education is the key. And you can say part and parcel, that was one of his missions, to educate humankind and to push them toward this. So important for our development in religion and in the world as well, both areas.
Jazakallah Hanif, for a very scholarly answer there. Staying in Germany, we have another question from Musawwir Aziz Sahib. And his question is in reference to a book of the Promised Messiah, Tofa Golriya. And I'll read the quotation out. It says that there are two advents of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Muhammadi advent, characterized by majesty and awe under the influence of Mars, and the second advent in a mantle of beauty under the influence of Jupiter. The quotation goes on, but his question is that what is the relationship of planets to our spiritual fitness, individually and also as a community as a whole?
This you referring? Yes. The overall system of what some will call astronomy is perhaps looked at and goes to extreme limits. This is the problem we face. Islam doesn't believe that the moment the full moon comes out, it's going to turn us influence in a certain way. As you had the idea of lunacy. Lunatic means one who was influenced by the light of the moon. And likewise, all of the planets, once they have a certain influence on us in our life, the moment we're born, they try to assign to us a astrological sign based on when we were born and time of year. And again, the influence through the life, you were born in a certain year. The Chinese have these years based on, again, planets and other things. But Islam is not saying this is the case, that it is the only influence. There are some influences. There are definitely influence of every planet. Sun, moon has influence on the material world that we see around us, how it affects the plant's growth, it affects the tides movement, it affects the atmosphere. We are part of material creation. So naturally, it has some influence on us. And what Hazrat Masih Maud is talking about here is that cyclical rotation, the movement of, you call the alternation of night and day and influence of all the things of the universe, which is mentioned throughout the Quran. And in here, it's characterized by certain signs. The Holy Prophet Muhammad is called Ash-Shams, the sun. And Prophet is called the Qamar, the moon, because they have certain qualities. The sun is the one that gives the light, the moon is the one that absorbs the light. So naturally, in this era of the moon, all of us are, in a sense, of the same quality. We're absorbing the light that was absent for a long period of time. And those who are joining this community, by God's grace, this is the light they are receiving. So they are part of the system of the lunar system. The early era were those companions who were light stars, who were giving off light. And the Holy Prophet Muhammad said, but all of my companions are like stars themselves. They are light-giving sources. So we can see in his era was the influence of the sun. And likewise, each planetary phase, so to speak, has some kind of spiritual influence as well, which is being mentioned here, in terms of the power or in terms of the compassion. So Moses alayhi salam, he would have been that, like that planet Mars, you know, the powerful. That time was there. But then Jesus came along, alayhi salam, and he was like this planet, you know, the Jupiter, who was compassionate and had to withdraw and use a different approach. So the Christians, you see, they have the same qualities as the Ahmadi community. That they're not warlike, they're not militant, they're not those who had to go out and aggressively fight for their rights. They were peaceful and pacifist. They were compassionate and they were patient in their qualities. These are some of the things that you find in the planets. It's a very interesting science. It's a very deep one. But again, my main point is we don't accept this idea of astrology as the way that everything is defined by these suns and stars, and this is the only influence. There are many other influences from angelic forces, from satanic forces, from material forces, you know, magnetic. So many things that are coming in our life that we have to keep that balance. That's just one of them, but defined in errors as well.
Exactly. A wonderful explanation of that. Dr. Saib, we have a question from Malia Saiba from Canada. Her question is regarding the assisted suicide. The ban was struck down in Canada, and she's just asking in relation to that people who suffer from terminal illnesses, with the doctor's approval, can they be assisted in suicide as such?
Well, this is a question that not only is very struggling for Canada, but for all nations, all countries. As we find that an aging population, there are certain ailments and illnesses which people perhaps find very difficult to live with, and therefore they think of this perhaps easy way out, where they would like to finish their life, suicide, euthanasia, call it what you like, whether it is physician assisted or whether it is some other way assisted. This is in essence suicide, isn't it? Because you are taking your own life. In whichever means that is. It has very difficult moral and ethical questions and religious questions that trouble you. There are some very desperate situations that you hear about of people in these situations. So it is a situation which does need a lot of thought from all angles, and much has been debated about it. Some have said that once you take this step, it is a slippery slope. And I heard Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi, the fourth caliph of the Ahmadi community, use this term, slippery slope, first. And now I find it is used very commonly in arguments of this nature. And I think it's a very apt term, that once you take this first step of allowing people to terminate their lives through this channel, then you don't know where you're going to end up in this whole scenario, because who is going to make that decision? Is it the person who is dying, or is it their family who've had enough of them, or is it the state because it's economically not viable any longer to keep such people alive of the costs, that is healthcare costs? So there will be no regulation as far as that is concerned. And religions, all religions say thou shalt not kill. Islam says that, Christianity says that, and that not only is for others, killing others, but it is also in killing yourself, because life is sacrosanct, and this is the gift of God that He has given man, and you are rejecting that gift of God that He has given you. So this goes against the natural inclination, the natural teaching of God Almighty, is that this is in His hand, and man dies when he decides. So when God decides. So as far as physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, dying is concerned, these are some of the issues that are counteracted. You see, it's also it's a little bit difficult for a doctor as well. When you look at a doctor, what is his Hippocratic oath?
That's right.
He says that I will not administer any poison to anyone. I will try to do good for people, and if I cannot do good to them, at least I will do them no harm.
In fact, he even asks that if a Muslim doctor has to perform that,
right.
I think that
right.
he has an oath to.
That should be for any doctor. This is what he has been trained for, to save life, not to terminate life. And if obviously he agrees to that request of the patient or their family, then actually he is going against the ethos of the Hippocratic Oath is teaching.
I think one thing they try to bring in here is that as a doctor, I'm still assisting my patient because they're suffering so much and there's no hope, and this end of pain, which is unbearable. This is, sometimes the pain threshold is way beyond what any human being should have to bear, and so their compassion comes in. That I'm assisting this life still to go through this phase of illness and infirmity, which no human should have to bear. So that's how I kind of justify in my mind what I'm doing. But you're right, it almost takes the Hippocratic oath and make it a hypocritical oath, because you've turned around that you're supposed to be helping life and you're actually ending life. And I would say, why don't they focus the energy on finding better ways of pain management as opposed to life and death management, because this is the issue, as Dr. Sab said, it's in the hands of God. He is yuhyi, he gives life or yumit, and he causes that. Only God has these. We didn't come on our own will, and we don't leave on our own wish. That's just how it is for everyone. But at the end of life issues, so difficult, because you see the loved ones who are suffering like that and you want to end the pain. And what about the hope of finding a cure the very next day after you've ended the life? How would that person feel then? If the next day is announced, we found the miracle cure for that thing that your loved one was suffering from, but the day before you just said, I can't take it no more, end of my line. So only Allah knows this. And we've discussed in the past, what is the purpose of all this suffering as well in the end of these issues? It's not just the individual who's suffering, it's all those around them, how they respond to every circumstance of life. Because Allah has told us in the Quran that He will try us with our lives as well. The life, our own, the life of our loved ones. And if this is not a trial, then what is going to be a trial? Or they just get a cold or a sneeze and that's it? No, their life is at a point where you perhaps think like this. Better to take them out of this world than to keep them like this. And one hadith, a lady came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and she was struggling with an ailment that she said, I cannot bear no more. So, O Messenger, please pray that God will cure me. And what she was suffering with is, it was an epileptic kind of situation, and she just couldn't take it no more. She said, please, because when I have these fits, all my clothes will fall off and I'm exposed naked in the market and I'm feeling very embarrassed. So pray that God will remove from me this ailment. His response was, I can do one of two things. I can pray that you'll be cured, or I can pray that God gives you the reward and the patience to deal with this. Because if you deal with it patiently, you'll get a tremendous reward from God. And she realized that what an opportunity. My suffering is actually leading me closer to my Creator, which is the whole purpose of my life, to get close to God. Okay, I don't want to take away this opportunity to use this moment of suffering, this trial, this difficulty, to get close to God. But please just pray one thing, that when I have my fit, it won't shake me so much my clothes will fall off because I get so embarrassed. So he said, I will pray that much for you. So you see that he had this compassion to know that she was suffering and she was at her limit, but he advised her that there's a blessing in it. And this is the thing we have to constantly remind ourselves before that point comes, and remind our loved ones when they're in that moment, and remind the ones around loved ones when they're going through it, that these things are in God's view. He does have compensation for everything we suffer. He will recognize the pain and torment. It won't be forever. It's always limited, No suffering is eternal. So try your best to bear with it. And that has to be the message for society.
You've both mentioned the fact that the idea or the belief in God is central to overcome that certainly, indeed, that terrible pain that they're suffering. So I think if any assistance that can be provided, I think that is the best assistance, that given the belief of God. Yeah.
That's right. The aspect of suffering, and he has highlighted that of how that takes one nearer to God. It just reminds me of another hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And suffering is a very relative thing. I mean, what one person considers as extreme suffering may be nothing to another person. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, even the prick of a thorn, man will gain obviously salvation through that. So as Azhar Sahib says that these are the ways that paths to Allah and nearness to Him, and these are opportunities that people in these conditions perhaps have in that respect. And I mean, if they bring in physician-assisted dying, as Azhar Sahib has said, the research that goes into these ailments and these diseases, that will be totally discouraged. Why should they then go and spend billions and millions of pounds and dollars in trying to find out the cures for these very extreme ailments when they have an easy way out? So as Khalifa Rabi said, this is the slippery slope, and this is what one should avoid in order to avoid all these issues and problems in society.
Jazakallah, gentlemen. I hope that answers Miliha Sahiba's question. And just a reminder to our viewers that, as I mentioned before, that this is an interactive program, and the discussion that we have here is based on the questions that you send, and you can send your questions to us, or any comments or observations that you have about this program at Faith Matters, faithmatters@mta.tv. That's faithmatters@mta.tv. Dr. Sahib, we have another question from Moon Rashid Sahib. It doesn't say where he's exactly from, and that's in relationship to our human relationship with the environment, our interaction with it. And he says that, are we called to be stewards of the environment under the Islamic teachings? And he also asks that, or is the environment just there for our exploitation and use?
Well, Allah the Almighty is the creator of all, the creator of the universes, more than one, is the master, and that He has created all is for our benefit. And this is what He mentions in the Holy Quran, that all that has been created for man. And obviously something that has been gifted to us, whenever someone gives a gift to a person, that person is expected obviously to cherish it if he loves that person, and to look after it and tries to maintain it in the condition that was given to him. This is the gift that has been given to us. So the universe is a gift that Allah the Almighty actually has given to the human race as such, and everything that has been put in it has been put in it with a specific purpose. Everything that God has created has been created with purpose, and nothing is without purpose, and that is for the benefit of man, who is the greatest of God's creation. So this planet is the place of our abode in this life, and it is the duty of every man to be able to look after and cherish that planet, and to make sure that the balance that God has created in the universe is not disturbed in any respect. And that brings you to the question of the environment and how man looks after the environment. And this is something that we know that is now fully researched as how man destroys the environment, and what needs to be done to make sure that we are not harming the environment as such. In Surah Rahman, Allah says, "Ash-shamsu wal-qamaru bihusban wan-najmu wash-shajaru yasjudan was-samaa rafa'aha wa wada'a al-mizan." So God is pointing out to us that the sun and the moon run their courses according to their fixed times, and the stemless plants and the trees submit to Him. Even the tiniest of stemless plants that they are submit to God Almighty as the creator. The heaven He has raised high above and set up as a measure, that you may not transgress. This is the important thing, that you must not transgress the measure. And this is Allah the Almighty pointing out to us that the universe in fact has been created with good measure, and man must not do anything that will upset that measure, upset that balance. So it is our responsibility. Each individual person, each society, each community has this responsibility of looking around them and see how one must pay due regard, due attention to looking after the environment as such. And we know that there are many things that we are aware of now, which man must do in order to make sure that yes, he uses the universe, the world as has been given to him, and takes benefit of all that has been provided by God Almighty, but he does not misuse that to that degree. We talk about deforestation, obviously, in parts of the world where trees have been cut down, on a scale, and all the issues that they have caused in those parts and other parts is something that we are well aware of. the Holy Prophet ﷺ, you know, he discouraged Muslims that when you go to war, when you conquer, you should not cut down trees, fruit-bearing trees. And you know, that was given 1400 years ago. And now man is now realizing the importance of maintaining this balance by not cutting down trees unwantonly. And he gave advice on a Muslim that when he plants a tree, he looks after it, it bears fruit, birds eat of it, then that Muslim is rewarded for that good act that he has done. And that actually shows us the actual life cycle of different creatures who will benefit from that one act of that one person. Then we have wastage, you know, this is or water wastage. Water is an essential part of this universe that we have, and it's an essential part of our life. And this is something that we have always to look after. So wastage of water is something that obviously one needs to be well aware of, so that it does not create problems in that nature. So man as an individual has been given the custodianship of this planet, and it is his responsibility. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ 1400 years ago has pointed these out to us, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are abiding by the true nature and teachings of Islam. Unfortunately, we see some events in recent past in certain parts of the world where so-called Muslims have actually have disregarded all these teachings, not in just terms of the religion of Islam and the practices of Islam, but also with regard to the environment, and are damaging the environment in that respect. So that is something that we all need to be wary of, that it is a gift from God, a gift that we must cherish and continue to seek the benefits and rewards of that environment.
Dr. Zahid. We are fast approaching the end of the program. One final question that we have for today's program is from Shajil Sahib from Canada. And Shajil Sahib, Jazakallah for your kind comments and your question. Azhar Sahib, he asks that his question is that how can we tackle and eradicate the threat of radicalization among minority groups? And he says that's having a seriously disruptive impact upon societies and intercultural relations. So what is the Islamic perspective on that?
When we hear this word, radicalization, we are assuming something perhaps from recent events that may not be implied in the question, because the radicalization of this term, it means those become extremists, terrorists, influenced by a jihadist type of attitude and want to go around the world and kill everyone who's not part of your ideology, and thus this is an us against them attitude. And these Muslim groups, so-called, followers of Islam, are doing these things. But in this question, it's not so much the radicalization, it's the reaction. How do we stop the reaction that sometimes becomes violent in terms of protest, violent in terms of the outcry by these individuals who feel that society has failed them? And thus you see amongst why minority groups, because the majority has not done what we talked about earlier, become a society that's just and balanced and equitable in distribution of all resources, and giving opportunity to all avenues of progress. And this is across the board, whether you're going to look in developed nations such as the US, or in undeveloped nations as well, as you find in Africa and Asia and islands. So it's not an issue only to civil society or undeveloped society. It's a basic question of a society. Has it provided for the needs of the people? And once it does not, there's two ways that the second caliph says you create revolution. Is you fight it out, or you pray it. You pray toward your success. There's only two ways it's going to go about. So if they have failed to provide, there are few who will adopt the way of prayers. Even now, the Muslim world, what has our Khalifa been telling them over and over again? Hazrat Qutb the fifth, current Khalifa of our community, has been telling them, pray to God Almighty. He is the controller of all the heavens and the earth, the movements of even hearts and minds, and he can move the minds as he did in the case of the Holy Prophet Muhammad and the opposition he faced. So pray to him. But what do you see? They're protesting. They're using the same tactics of others who've done before, terrorist tactics and political maneuvering. This is what fails. So I believe the first step is, for instance, recently what happened in the U.S., the events in Ferguson, Missouri. I think most people in the world know about it. Why did that come about? I lived there for 7 years. I know this community. I know the people who are there. And I know what they're facing. I give you an example. I myself, being a missionary of this community, imam, or person, clergy, there were times I couldn't drive down certain roads without keeping my eye on my rear view mirror that the police may come behind me. As soon as I entered this street, I knew I was on high alert, because this was an area of profiling of anyone that looked like me, African American. Didn't matter who you were. You could have been Mr. Obama, our president, driving down that street, but once they saw you, you were profiled. And that is the sign of injustice. Once that happens, and that happens to you once, twice, over again, you get pulled over, you get arrested, or you get ticketed, as we see they were doing, it creates a buildup of frustration, of anger. And this is what leads to what you call radicalization. I call it reaction. And sometimes overreaction, because you say enough is enough, we're not going to take this anymore, and then they begin to do these protest movements. Whether it's the Arab Spring, or whether it's the protests that happened in the US or anywhere else in the world, these were the backstories. This was the basis of it. So the solution has to be what Islam talks about. First and foremost, create a harmonious, just society where things are distributed equitably. Everyone feels that they have the equal opportunity to advance in society and not discriminated, or there's no bias in the society. And once you remove that element, this is what most demand. Civil rights movement was what? The right to have basic equal opportunity across the board. And everywhere you go in the Muslim world now, they're having these rebellions and riots. What is it? They want to have equal access like these kings and rulers who have these palatial golden palaces. Just give me a house, for God's sake. Give my children some education. Yours are going to Cambridge and Harvard and these places. I can't even get them into the local madrasa basic school system because they got to go in fields all day long and work. This is the imbalance that's there in the world, and Islam came and solved this 14 centuries ago and lifted the underprivileged and provided for up to high standards. And they didn't have to resort to these kind of mechanisms to attain their rights. Give them their rights, they won't fight for their rights. Deprive them their rights, they'll either pray or they'll fight, and generally they choose to fight. So this is the way we can try to help these societies and advise them.
Jazakallah, Hanif Sahib, and also Dr. Sahib, for a very enlightening and scholarly discussion for today's program. But that's all the time that we have for today. Also, Jazakallah to all our viewers who have sent in your feedback and questions. This program wouldn't be what it is without your input. And once again, a reminder to everyone that you can give your comments or questions to this program at faithmatters@mta.tv. That's faithmatters@mta.tv. But from all of us here in the studio, until the next edition of Faith Matters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.